Hello, I'm Linda Seith from The Layered Onion. Thank you for joining us. We will be listening to our amazing creators talk about their art and mental health. 48 million artists all over the world share this lived experience. The Layered Onion was formed to create a supportive community, allowing the creators to focus on their art, bringing their work from the shadows to receive the recognition and opportunities they deserve. Each podcast will feature an artist who talks about their creations and mental wellness. Art is healing. We hope these discussions will inspire you to appreciate the stories behind the creations and, more importantly, inspire your inner creator. Together, we can tackle the stigma surrounding mental health. So, hello, Noah. How are you?
Good. How's it going, Linda?
Yeah, it's going great. So maybe, Noah, you can introduce yourself to everybody in our community.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name's Noah Bloedorn. I am the director of the Dane County Food Collective, and I also work for a nonprofit called REAP Food Group. I recently just graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a master's in urban planning with focus in food system, and that's sort of the area that I've been working on for the last 7 years, specifically in southern Wisconsin. And yeah, I kind of just fell in love with this area because of its intersections with obviously health and wellness. That's something we work a lot on and we'll talk about a lot today, but also economic and social justice and a lot of other social movements going on. And it's just been a really cool last 6 or 7 years working on this kind of stuff, and it's really blossomed these last few years. So it's been an honor and privilege to be a part of it.
Well, that sounds pretty exciting. Maybe we could start, though, for folks with talking about, I know REAP is where the Dane County Food Collective, sort of the idea blossomed. So maybe we start with REAP. Can you tell us a little bit about REAP?
Yeah, so REAP is a, let's see, I think it's 25-year-old organization based out of Madison, Wisconsin. And it's really focused on how do we increase local food purchasing, right? At a whole scale level. But we do that in a number of ways. And we have a few projects at REAP, our farm to school, farm to business, and farm to families programs. And those are all trying to figure out ways to connect consumers to good, nutritious local food. And obviously, like I mentioned before, I think a lot of that work stems from intersections with health, public health, individual wellness, environmentalism, economic sustainability, and all of those kind of things. So REAP's been doing this work for 25 years. We've had a lot of exciting new projects coming about lately. I work closely with the Farm Fresh Atlas, which is a community of farms, farmers markets, restaurants, organizations that are all committed to increasing the production of local food and the purchasing of local food. And that's sort of where I got a lot of connections for the Dane County Food Collective. And so the relationship there really is that REAP is really focused on sort of the economic growth of local food. And what I was dealing with all of my interactions with the farmers and the chefs and everybody that we work with was they need programming that's responsive to their needs, not just in an economic sense, but in a more holistic sense, both whether that has to deal with health and wellness or with policy, which is another big arm of DCFC.
So maybe we could talk a little bit. Who are some of the members of Dane County Food Collective, or what kind of folks can be?
Totally. So the cool thing about Dane County Food Collective is that it's open to the public, and it's sort of because it really engages this community that is cyclical with seasons and schedules and busyness. The membership is really fluid and organic, and people participate in some ways but don't necessarily attend meetings, or they participate as they can, which I think is really exciting. Some of our founding members, I just got off a call with our executive committee, and Those individuals are Francesca Hong, who's the chef owner at Morris Ramen, Christy McKenzie, who's the owner of Pasture and Plenty, Evan Donnells, who's the chef owner of Cadre in Madison, and Megan Stern, who works with Dane by Local and has been a huge part of DCFC and our health and wellness programming specifically. And she does a great job of bringing in people in her network into the program. But yeah, I mean, it's a big network of chefs, farmers, restaurant owners, just generally people who are working in this space. And I think DCFC has become a home for people who maybe we're frustrated that there's a lot going on in the community, but not a lot of momentum. And I think the idea behind DCFC is to empower these individuals to make that change that they want to see on their own and like do it themselves rather than relying on a nonprofit or government agency to fix these problems.
So maybe talk about what are some of the focuses of doing it on your own, or what are some of the efforts that you guys ever can?
Well, it was interesting because DCFC came about after the pandemic, and there were a lot of issues related to supply chains and obviously public health and understanding like regulation coming down onto restaurants during this time, right? Like there was a lot of back and forth of what full capacity meant at a restaurant and how many people could you let in and what were all the regulations and protective gear you had to give your staff and all those kind of things. And I think at first we had this really big idea of what DCFC could be, but as things started to like return to normal, so to speak, we really honed in on health and wellness. And a lot of our programming is related to both individual, but also like culturally within the food industry. How are we taking care of ourselves and each other in a way that makes this work sustainable? Because anyone who's worked in the food industry sort of understands that it can be a really stressful and taxing job or industry to be in. And so what's come out of that is sort of this wide array of health and wellness programming. We have like physical health and wellness. So we do weekly workout group sessions at Pat's Gym. That's open to everyone, free of charge, Mondays and Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. at Pat's Gym. That's been an amazing group of people. Obviously, that's open to everyone and, kind of fluctuates, but we've had a really core group of people who have been a part of that. And that's been going probably 13, 14 months now. And it's just been such a rewarding experience to be a part of because we're really starting to see the benefits of it a year later and into it, both physically, but also emotionally and mentally as well. And what it means for staff and employers and stuff like that to have a space that they can be together that is like sober and healthful, right? And wholesome. So I think that's been a really exciting program. That's probably been one of our most successful things that we've done through Dane County Food Collective. Another thing that we've been doing is a program called Sunday Meets. And that's sort of where Pat's Gym is a physical health and wellness. This is sort of a mental health and wellness, and just providing a space where people can get together the first Sunday of every month at Blind Shot Social Club and talk through issues they may be going through in their work or life. And just, it's a very welcoming, open space, and just looking at creating dialogue and connection for people within the industry. That group has been smaller, but we kind of say this every time, is it's such a rewarding experience for everyone involved. And every time it's sort of, the programming always changes, but it really suits to the needs of the individuals who come. And it's just a really great space for people to get together. One of the other programs that I was a part of, and I am so excited to sort of think through what the future of this program will be and what the long-term impacts are. We had a cohort of 16 individuals who went through what's called peer specialist training. And a peer specialist is someone who provides support for individuals struggling with mental health and addiction issues, and really tries to empower that individual to take charge in their life and figure out the best ways for them to deal with those issues on their own. And yeah, I mean, it's such a radical idea, because often peer support specialists are hired in spaces like prisons or rehab centers, or just dealing with individuals who I think like are really facing a lot of judgment and oppression from society. And what the peer specialist tries to do is really help empower that individual and find ways for them to get out of the situation that they're in. And yeah, again, that training was so powerful. And coming out of it, we're about to take tests at the end of this month to certify individuals. But hopefully what we're doing year after year is building a network of people with this training, whether they want to become certified peer specialists professionally or just have that training and know how to help people in the workplace and build out this network within food systems. So I think
So
that
is there a goal with having one per geographic area or one per business, or what is kind of the thought?
I think at this moment, I think we want to like meet as a group and build out, envision what the project will look like long term. I think for the moment, what we're just trying to do is train people and build the network out as much as possible. I mean, right now, we probably have 7 or 8 individuals all working in Dane County within the food system, within restaurants and other places, who can all be a resource. And I think that's invaluable. And in some ways, I mean, I'm excited to, build out the programming of that and understand ways that we can apply that training directly. But I think it'll have a lot of indirect effects that'll improve the culture within the local food system.
Maybe you could give me an example of what you think would be an indirect benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's probably worked in a restaurant understands that there's individuals who maybe are like recently incarcerated and integrating back into the workplace. And there's going to be some like culture shocks that happen. And especially within a stressful environment like a kitchen or, on the floor dealing with customers or something like that. And I think the indirect benefits are things like when emergency happens, I think after the training, people feel really empowered to deal with those situations. They have some training and competency to address those issues. And then I think even more like broadly, right, we're talking about employers and people who set the culture within a business are probably going to be more sensitive and understanding of like what certain privileges they may have in a workplace, and trying to navigate those things, as well as providing like the best space possible for their employees to live and work.
So it sounds pretty exciting. And I think that was, to me, I hear a lot about when you talk about, a holistic approach and both health and wellness, and you hear a lot about mental wellness. And that, of course, is why we connected, the Layered Onion and the Dane County Food Collective. We had the opportunity to be in a cohort this summer that was for social mission organizations. And I was right away struck with the mental wellness piece, because it's often hard to do the physical wellness if you're not in a good space, right?
Right. Right.
So I was really struck. And then the other thing that I just continued to be a little bit wowed, I'd always thought about culinary artists, but the more I talked to the different owners or others, how many are artists in their outright?
Totally. Right. And I think it's interesting that we even separate the two often, just like generally as a society, right? And like, obviously we understand that creating food is a creative process. And like, I'm also a believer that anything can be a creative process. especially as someone who, works in an office every day. I like to think that I'm creative in the way, like my approach to my job and things like that. But obviously, the food industry is a home for creatives, both within the industry, but also just because of its like flexible hours and flexible pay schedules and all those kind of things. Like it is a home for artists. And actually, I think part of the reason I love this industry so much and the work that I do is because it is such an eclectic group of people. It's home. It's like home to a lot of what some people call pirate ships. Some people refer to their restaurants as pirate ships or motley crews, right? Like these are people who often don't feel welcome in other industries and don't feel like they can make a living in other industries. And especially local food, you get this beautiful mixture of creatives and people who are really passionate about the environment or mental health or whatever, and can do that through a local food business, which I think is pretty incredible.
And, there was actually, I think the timing of this is really interesting is, there was just some research that came out this week about inflammation, and inflammation in diet and is pretty prevalent diet causes a lot of inflammation, and we're seeing more and more inflammatory diseases, right? But they just this week published a study about the huge tie to inflammation and depression. And, I think that if we can change the food system, as you are talking about, that has the huge potential of decreasing inflammation, which could really have a huge impact, not only on physical health, but obviously mental health. I was really thought a lot about that this week, Noah, of how that food system work has such an opportunity to sort of change what has become kind of quite a chronic condition.
Completely. And yeah, again, it's something that really energizes me and the work that we're doing. And I couldn't agree more. Like, I think once you start delving into this world, you really understand that current food systems are they're made for profit and efficiency, and they take no regard for your personal health, your mental health, or your well-being in any sense. And it's no surprise to me, right, that like when we're feeding ourselves what is really poison, that affects of course that affects your mental health. When you're not feeling well, you're not going to want to get out of bed and go to do something to help yourself or your community. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm always energized by the intersectionality of the work that we do. And it's sometimes it's like, it's so mired in how do we, increase the purchase of local food at like this whole scale level, but we're really doing it because we understand that when you do that, you're taking care of your community, you're creating, sustainable jobs and nourishing people, truly nourishing them. And so many people just don't have access to that nourishment. And I keep saying that word lately, and I think I'm trying to push it for this theme for our magazine.
Nourishment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's really at the center of the work that we're doing. It's like, how do we nourish our community, our bodies, our minds, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And, something I've been wondering, or it made me think about, and perhaps with your education, your master's degree, you got maybe as someone's, when was the moment in time? Was it the 1950s when we went to more quick food? Is that the time we started to see this real change? Or is there a different moment in time? Because the scales have tipped, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think 1950s was really a pivotal moment. I don't think it was the first moment that we started to move away from traditional food systems. I think the Dust Bowl is another era. So like the 20s, 30s, where we were seeing the effects of a switch to industrial agriculture and what that meant for the land at that time. And that was probably more the genesis of this issue. but obviously the 50s was all about like the commercialization of it and bringing it into people's households. Obviously, at the same time, you're seeing, women enter the workforce, and that was where food labor was before, right? Like women were cooking foods for families, right? And once that societal shift happened, we were marketing convenience and efficiency rather than good food, right? And then we saw that commodified, and now we're in this sort of system. And certainly, my experience growing up was, food coming from the freezer, fast food, just food that really isn't food. It just frankly is not food, right? It's full of chemicals that you're not supposed to be eating, dyes. It was probably harvested last year, processed, frozen, all of that kind of stuff. And obviously that's just not how our bodies were adapted to process food. And now I think we're seeing the effects of that long term, whether that's public health and all these public health crises that we're having, but also in the lack of communities that we have, right? Like, I think another huge side effect that we often don't talk about is how the industrialization of the food system destroyed rural communities. Because those rural communities used to have, a family-run grocer and a seed bank and a granary and all of these other things. And now that's all been sort of, broken down into a single corporate infrastructure. And we no longer have access to this infrastructure. And actually, that's the work that we're doing at REAP right now, is trying to rebuild that small and mid-scale infrastructure so that these small farmers have access to processing their food and bringing it into bigger markets.
So Noah, I don't know if you know this. I'm just a tad older than you.
Yeah.
Call that a tad plus. But I actually grew up in the grocery business. My father had my parents had a small grocery store in a very small town.
What town?
Milton?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah. So
cool.
We were one of those. And, it was...
breaks. Sorry.
No. Well, and my partner, my spouse, grew up on a small dairy farm.
Right.
So we very much had a very different beginning, of course, than our own kids do.
And what's interesting about this work is I often meet people from your generation who talk fondly about growing up and living on a farm, or connections to grocers or restaurants and all of these things. And I think that's super rare now. Like, how many of people my age do I know that grew up on a farm, even though I'm working in this industry? Or certainly, not growing up with a family grocery store or something, because they're really almost non-existent anymore. And as an urban planner too, just thinking of a space like a local grocery store as a community center as well. And I'm sure your family grocer was, right? Like, I always think about, we had a community butcher shop, and that was my first job that I had. And just the connection that my dad had to the butcher, those sort of relationships are few and far between these days, where the person who's cutting your meat or growing your food, or even, retailing your food. Those connections are gone. And I think that affects us as a community, especially when we have a crisis with isolation as well.
Well, I also think it changes what you think is whole foods. Yeah. So before the grocery store, my dad was in the grocery industry from being 12 years old on.
Yeah.
Before we were in the grocery industry, I had a grandfather and grandmother who had a 3 to 4 acre parcel of land that we grew large amounts of vegetables, right. And some of it was sold, of course, to market. But Much of it was to support, all the families that, they had, I think, 8 kids and, support all those families. And so we canned, we froze, we did all those things. And I think back about how many people really know, okay, what is truly a whole food? I think that a lot don't have that experience.
I think so too. And like you're saying, there's a lot of lost knowledge too. Like what used to be passed down generation to generation, of whether that's how to grow food yourself or preserve it or process it or whatever. I think we're losing that a lot. And I mean, yeah, I hope what we're doing not only to increase the purchase of local food, but is also to get people interested in food at whatever stage or ability they want to be a part of it. But and I mean, speaking with you, like that is a creative outlet that I think is lost on a lot of people. And it used to be so much more of like a societal thing that everybody did was cook for themselves or cook for their families, or grow their own food, and which is of course a really rewarding and beautiful creative process. But you don't see it as much anymore. Obviously, there are trends, and I think Madison and Dane County, southern Wisconsin are sort of hotbeds where these things exist, but I don't think everyone has access to it.
So let's spend a few minutes just actually talking about Noah.
Yeah.
And what really led you to being interested in sort of the holistic food, but also sort of the health and wellness parts?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like ever since a little kid, I've been super interested in politics, which is kind of silly, but it's true. And I guess always interested in like topics of social justice, and like theory of change, right? But growing up, I had a really not great relationship with food. Not that anything was necessarily wrong, but I certainly didn't know how to cook for myself. I didn't know where my food was coming from. I wasn't eating healthy food. And I'm sure that, like we were saying before, was obviously affecting mental health as well. My first job was in a butcher shop. And for me, it was exciting because, I wanted a job. I wanted a thing to do, and I wanted to make my own money, and that provided some freedom in my life. And that started at age 14, and I still am working in the food industry. And at first it was just because that's the only industry that hires a 14-year-old, really. But when I went to college, again, that was the best job that I could have that didn't conflict with my school schedule, was working as a cook. And they would hire me without any skills or any knowledge on how to like make food. And which is incredible. And that still exists today because every restaurant in town is hiring. But it's a welcoming place. And I think I really found community in that. And then sort of being immersed in that world, it was a creative outlet for me in a way that I had never experienced before. And it was a community that I was, longing for. And also I was eating food that I never knew of and was really exploring and experiencing amazing food for the first time in my life. So it really inspired a deep passion within me. And it sort of coalesced with this time in college where, I was passionate about the environment. I was passionate about social justice issues, but I didn't know what that meant for me in terms of a career. And I entered for REAP and just started to get exposed to this local food community, which again, in Madison is so rich. And there is so much passion, not just for the food, but for the community as well. And that sort of just inspired me. And it's insane to me to think that it's been 6 or 7 years doing this work, but it's really become my whole life now, and it's a really beautiful thing. And I think I didn't mention this before, but at that time too, I was my dad was dying of cancer, and like I said, I was sort of longing for a community and a purpose, and I just think it was a good outlet for me during that time and helping me process those emotions, dealing with depression and anxiety during that time. And yeah, again, sort of just gave me the tools to address my own health and wellness as well.
Yeah, I've really noticed a real sense of community around Dane County Food Collective, that whenever you're with any of the groups, there's this immediate acceptance of where people are at and from. I've really appreciated that. And so if the entire food industry, and I know the grocery business was like that, and you see it in farm communities, maybe, it's there, it's just a part of food, right?
I think so, right? Like at the end of the day, like food is meant for sharing, and it's just this beautiful experience. Like, why wouldn't you make food to share with someone else? And, it allows people to come together and connect in a beautiful way, whether that's in your home or on a community level as well. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that was something very early on that I experienced and never let go of because it was so impactful on me.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And I think we'll talk again because we have a project that we're starting to work on. So the next time, maybe we'll talk about that.
Cool. Well, we won't announce it until then.
I think we'll wait.
Okay. Ooh, little cliffhanger. You guys will have to stay tuned.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to talk with these amazing creators. You can see and read the artist's work in the Shallot, our journal of mental health, art, and literature, or on our website, thelayeredonion.com. Thank you.